The battle alert klaxons had long since fallen silent aboard the ESS Intrepid, but Commander Sarah Chen barely noticed their absence. Her small office, tucked away in a quiet corner of the tactical division, was illuminated only by the soft glow of holographic star charts and the occasional flash of distant weapons fire through the reinforced viewport. While her fellow officers huddled around quantum computers and advanced prediction matrices, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by hand-drawn maps and calculations scribbled on actual paper. Her colleagues had long since learned not to question her methods, not since the Battle of Proxima, where her seemingly primitive approach had saved an entire civilian fleet. A gentle chime from her desk terminal interrupted her concentration. "Commander," the ship's communication system announced, "Admiral Zhao requests your presence in the war room immediately." Sarah gathered her papers, carefully folding them into precise squares before tucking them into her uniform pocket. The walk to the war room was short, but it gave her time to organize her thoughts. She had seen something in the enemy's movement patterns, something that the quantum computers had missed. The war room was chaos when she arrived. Officers from 3 different species rushed between holographic displays, their voices rising in barely contained panic as they tracked the enemy fleet's advance. Admiral Zhou stood at the center of the storm, his weathered face illuminated by the red warning indicators that filled the main tactical display. "We've lost contact with the Centauri defense grid," a Rigelian tactical officer reported, their crystalline form pulsing with anxiety. "The enemy's quantum interference is blocking all standard communication channels." Sarah stepped forward, pulling out her folded papers. "Admiral, I believe I found something." The room fell silent as she spread her hand-drawn charts across the main tactical table. The Admiral raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He had learned to trust her insights. "Look here," she said, pointing to a series of seemingly random notations. "The enemy ships leave a pattern in their wake, not in their energy signatures or quantum states, but in the way they move. It's like—" She paused, searching for the right words. "It's like reading the ripples on a pond. You can tell where the stones were thrown by looking at how the waves intersect." The Rigelian officer's crystals dimmed in confusion. "Our quantum computers have analyzed every possible pattern. There is nothing." "That's just it," Sarah interrupted, spreading out another paper covered in intricate drawings. "You're looking for patterns in the data. I'm looking for patterns in their behavior. Humans have been tracking prey and predicting movement since before we had written language. It's not about the numbers. It's about understanding the intent behind them." Admiral Zhou leaned forward, his eyes widening as he began to see what Sarah had discovered. The enemy fleet's movements weren't random or even tactical. They were habitual. Like all living things, they had unconscious patterns in their behavior that no amount of technological sophistication could fully eliminate. "They're not just blocking our communications," Sarah explained, quickly sketching new lines on her chart. "They're hurting us. Every quantum interference burst is designed to push our fleet in a specific direction. But if we can see the pattern, we can predict where they'll strike next." The Admiral finished, a smile spreading across his face. Sarah nodded, already drawing up a new set of calculations. "Better than that. We can use their own patterns against them. A small fleet here," she circled a seemingly empty sector, "would force them to adjust their formation. They'll do it without even realizing why, because it's part of their ingrained tactical doctrine. And when they do—" The next hour was spent translating Sarah's hand-drawn insights into fleet commands. As the human ships moved into position, the enemy fleet reacted exactly as she had predicted, their sophisticated quantum strategies undone by their own unconscious patterns. By the time the battle was over, 3 solar systems had been secured without a single civilian casualty. The enemy fleet retreated in disarray, their perfect formations shattered by the one thing their quantum computers couldn't account for: human intuition. In her office later that night, Sarah started a fresh page in her notebook. The enemy would adapt, create new patterns, and she would be there to read them, one ripple at a time. Marcus Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled through the maintenance shaft of Orbital Station 7, his tool belt clanking softly against the metal panels. 6 weeks had passed since the surprise attack that left him stranded behind enemy lines, and he had spent every moment since then playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse. The station's new occupants, the Tarkasian Empire's elite engineering corps, considered human technology laughably primitive. They had dismissed him as harmless when they found him during their initial sweep, letting him continue his maintenance duties while they focused on upgrading the station with their advanced systems. That had been their first mistake. Critical fault detected in Sector 7 gravitational stabilizers, the station's AI announced in its new harsh Tarkasian accent. Marcus smiled to himself as he reached the junction he had been seeking. The aliens had replaced nearly every system with their own technology, but they had left the basic infrastructure intact. After all, why waste resources replacing simple support struts and power conduits? That had been their second mistake. Marcus pulled out his battered multi-tool, a relic from Earth that had served him for 20 years. While the Tarkasians used molecular assemblers and quantum alignment tools, he relied on steel, skill, and an intimate understanding of how things could break and how they could be fixed. Engineering Team Alpha, report to Sector 7. The announcement echoed through the shaft. Marcus worked faster, his practiced hands disconnecting and reconnecting cables in a precise sequence. The gravitational fault was just a distraction, one of many small problems he had engineered over the past weeks. The real target was something far more crucial. A group of Tarkasian engineers rushed past below him, their heavy footsteps resonating through the metal grating. They would find the gravitational systems running perfectly. After all, Marcus had already fixed them an hour ago. But while they were occupied with diagnostic checks, he would complete his real work. The station's quantum shield generator was a marvel of alien engineering, capable of deflecting any conventional attack. It was also, like most advanced technology, incredibly sensitive to power fluctuations. The Tarkasians had safeguarded it with dozens of backup systems and failsafes, but they hadn't counted on human ingenuity. Marcus connected the final wire in his improvised circuit. It was elegant in its simplicity. No quantum mechanics, no molecular programming, just basic physics. A carefully calibrated feedback loop that would create a harmonic resonance in the power grid, building slowly enough to avoid detection until it was too late. He had built it from spare parts, old timer circuits, mechanical relays, and bits of copper wire, the kind of technology the Tarkasians considered too primitive to even monitor. That would be their final mistake. As he sealed the access panel and began his retreat through the maintenance shaft, Marcus mentally counted down. In exactly 17 minutes, when the Tarkasian engineers would be in the middle of their shift change, the resonance would reach its peak. The shield generator wouldn't explode or fail catastrophically. That would be too obvious. Instead, it would suffer a cascade of tiny errors, each one within normal parameters, but combining to create gaps in the station's defenses, gaps that the human fleet waiting at the edge of the system would be able to exploit. Marcus emerged from the shaft into an empty corridor and straightened his maintenance uniform. A pair of Tarkasian officers passed by, barely sparing him a glance. To them, he was just another primitive human, too simple to understand their advanced technology. They never considered that understanding wasn't the same as appreciation. Marcus respected their technological achievements, but he also understood their limitations. Sometimes the simplest solution was the most effective, especially when your enemy was too sophisticated to expect it. His communicator, disguised as a malfunctioning environmental control panel, blinked once. The signal had been sent. The human fleet would arrive in exactly 3 hours. Marcus picked up his toolbox and headed toward his next task. There were still a few more mechanical failures to arrange before the fireworks began. After all, the best engineering solutions were the ones you never saw coming. Dr. Maya Patel stood before the crystalline vessel that had appeared in Earth's orbit 3 days ago, her heart racing despite her calm exterior. The ship's surface rippled like liquid glass, defying every attempt at conventional communication. 17 different species had tried their most advanced translation matrices. All had failed. But Maya saw something they'd missed. The ship isn't just sending signals, she explained to the gathered delegation of Earth's finest scientists and military leaders. It's singing. Admiral Chen raised an eyebrow. Singing, Doctor. Maya nodded, pulling up a holographic display of the energy patterns emanating from the vessel. Look at the wavelength variations. They're not random. And they're not just data. There's a rhythm to them, a melody. It reminds me of whale songs from old Earth recordings. The gathered aliens exchanged skeptical glances. The Regelian ambassador's crystalline form flickered with doubt. Our quantum translation matrices are designed to decode any logical communication pattern, if they cannot understand it. That's exactly the point, Maya interrupted, her dark eyes bright with excitement. We're all trying to find logic in their communications, but what if they don't think in logic? What if they think in music? She stepped to the control panel, her fingers dancing across the interface. The room filled with a haunting melody, a combination of the alien ship's emissions translated into audible sound, overlaid with a simple Earth melody she had composed in response. Humans have something special, Maya continued, adjusting the harmonics. We communicate through art, through music, through emotion. We don't just exchange information. We share feelings, impressions, meanings that can't be quantified. The ship's surface rippled more intensely, its crystalline structure beginning to pulse in time with Maya's melody. The gathered officials leaned forward, their skepticism giving way to curiosity. Every species develops communication based on their physical form and environment, Maya explained, her fingers never stopping their dance across the controls. These beings, I think they experience reality as patterns of resonance. They don't send messages, they share harmonies. The ship's response grew stronger, its surface now flowing like a liquid symphony. Maya adjusted her composition, incorporating elements of the alien harmonics while maintaining the core human melody. It was a duet across the stars, a conversation without words. Traditional translation focuses on finding direct equivalents, she said, her voice soft with concentration. But human languages are full of metaphors, idioms, cultural references. We understand that meaning isn't just in the words, it's in the context, the emotion, the shared experience. The crystalline ship's response changed, matching the cadence of her musical phrases. Patterns began to emerge in its surface, complex geometries that shifted and flowed with the combined melody. There, Maya whispered, pointing to a recurring pattern. That's not just random beauty. It's mathematics. They're showing us their understanding through harmony. She adjusted the composition again, weaving in simple mathematical progressions expressed through musical intervals. The ship's response became more structured, its surface organizing into recognizable geometric forms. The universal language isn't math or physics, Maya said, her voice filled with wonder. It's pattern recognition. It's the ability to find meaning in complexity. And humans, we've been doing that since we first looked up at the stars and found pictures in them. The ship's surface suddenly crystallized into a clear configuration, a three-dimensional representation of the solar system, rendered in flowing crystal. But it wasn't just a map. The movements of the planets were expressed as musical phrases, their orbits a cosmic symphony. Maya smiled, understanding flooding through her. They're not just showing us what they see. They're showing us how they see it. And because humans can think in metaphors, can understand meaning beyond literal translation. She turned to the assembled delegation, her eyes shining. We can bridge the gap, not because we have better technology, but because we understand that communication is about more than just exchanging data. It's about sharing perspectives, finding common ground in different ways of experiencing reality. The crystalline ship pulsed once, and a doorway appeared in its surface. An invitation, expressed through harmony instead of words. Maya stepped forward, already composing her response in her mind. Sometimes the best way to make first contact was not with words or logic, but with the universal human gift for finding connection in unexpected places. Lieutenant James O'Connor watched his targeting computer give up. Again. The holographic display flickered with confusion as it tried to predict his next maneuver, its advanced algorithms unable to cope with what he was about to do. He smiled, his hand steady on the controls of his fighter craft, the Firefly. "Computer, disengage predictive targeting," he commanded, his Irish lilt carrying clearly through the cockpit. "Switch to manual control." "Warning," the AI responded. "Combat effectiveness will be reduced by 78% without predictive assistance." The swarm of enemy fighters ahead of him moved in perfect formation, their movements guided by quantum-linked combat computers that could calculate billions of possible scenarios per second. They were the pinnacle of logical space combat evolution. That was exactly why they were about to lose. "Echo Squadron, follow my lead," James broadcasted to his wing. "Remember what we practiced. Think impossible thoughts." He pushed his fighter into a spiral that violated 3 different laws of tactical engagement. The enemy formation shifted to intercept, their movements precise and predictable. Their combat computers had calculated every rational response to his approach. But James wasn't being rational. He cut his main engines at the exact moment the enemy's targeting solutions locked on, letting his fighter tumble end over end through space. The enemy ships fired, their energy beams slicing through the void where their computers had predicted he would be. "Now," James called out, "show them what humans can do." His squadron broke formation, each pilot engaging in maneuvers that defied conventional combat logic. One spun her ship like a top while firing in seemingly random directions. Another flew directly at an asteroid, only to use its gravity to slingshot past the enemy's shields. The enemy formation began to break down as their combat computers struggled to generate solutions for the increasingly chaotic battlefield. Their perfect coordination became their weakness. Each ship trying to adjust to illogical human movements caused their neighbors to compensate, creating a cascade of confusion. James reignited his engines mid-tumble, using the momentum to dance between enemy ships that were now struggling to maintain their sophisticated attack patterns. "Humans have been fighting since we could pick up sticks," he muttered to himself. "And one thing we learned, sometimes the best technique is to have no technique." He had discovered this by accident during a training simulation. The computer had beaten him 99 times in a row until, out of frustration, he had stopped trying to win and simply flew by instinct. The simulation had crashed, unable to compute his random actions. That was when he realized the enemy's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They fought with perfect logic, which meant they could only respond to actions that made sense. "Squadron, Phase 2, he called out. Time to really confuse them. His pilots began implementing maneuvers they had developed in secret. Moves based on Earth sports, on dance, on the way falling leaves spun in autumn winds. Things no combat computer would ever conceive of, because they weren't meant for combat at all. An enemy fighter exploded as it tried to follow a human pilot performing a maneuver inspired by a ballet pirouette. 2 more collided while attempting to predict the path of a ship moving like a basketball performing a double crossover. James led his squadron straight toward the enemy flagship, his ship moving in patterns taken from Irish step dancing. The massive vessel's point defense systems fired and missed repeatedly, its targeting computers unable to establish a baseline for such erratic movement. "Remember," he broadcast to his squadron, "they're expecting us to fight like soldiers. So fight like dancers, like athletes, like children playing tag. Fight like humans." The enemy flagship's shields collapsed under a barrage fired by fighters moving in patterns based on honeybee dances and figure skating routines. As the larger vessel began its retreat, James allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't superior technology or perfect logic. Sometimes it was simply being unpredictable enough to make perfect logic meaningless. Chen Wei sat cross-legged on the floor of her makeshift library aboard the refugee transport ship Memories Wake, surrounded by handwritten journals and recorded memories from 100 different human colonies. While other historians relied on quantum data crystals and neural archives, she trusted in paper, ink, and the timeless human tradition of storytelling. The ship shuddered as another wave of quantum interference washed over it. Across the vessel, digital systems flickered and failed. But Chen's archives remained untouched, each story safely preserved in analog form. "Historian," a young colonist called from the doorway. "The captain requests your presence on the bridge." Chen carefully marked her place in the journal she was reading, a first-hand account of the farming techniques developed on New Eden colony. "Tell me, Raj," she asked as she stood, "what stories did your grandmother share about surviving the drought on Kepler 186 F?" The young man's eyes lit up. "She always told us about the underground gardens, how they used bioluminescent fungi from Earth to grow food when the surface became too hot." Chen smiled, making a mental note. It wasn't just a story, it was survival knowledge, passed down through generations. While digital archives focused on storing raw data, human stories preserved not just facts, but context, emotions, and crucial details that numbers alone couldn't capture. The bridge was eerily quiet when she arrived, most of its screens dark from the interference. Captain Santos stood before the main viewport, staring at the swirling quantum distortions that blocked their path. "Our navigation systems are useless," the captain said without turning. "The interference has corrupted all our star charts. We have 5,000 refugees aboard, and we're flying blind." Chen pulled out a worn leather notebook. "Not blind, Captain. Just looking in the wrong places." She opened the book to a page filled with handwritten notes. 3 years ago, I interviewed survivors from the Proxima colonies. They spoke of their grandparents using visual navigation, identifying safe routes by looking for specific patterns of stars that reminded them of Earth constellations. She stepped to the viewport, pointing to a particular cluster of stars barely visible through the interference. They called that formation the Fisher's Net, not because it looks like our Earth constellations, but because the light patterns reminded them of sunlight through fishing nets on their ocean world. The captain frowned. "What good does that do us?" "The stories mentioned that ships following the Fisher's Net always found safe harbor," Chen explained. "I cross-referenced this with other colonial narratives. Every successful refugee route from this sector followed the same star pattern. Not because of any navigational significance, but because this particular arrangement of stars means we're above the galactic plane where the quantum interference is weakest." Understanding dawned in the captain's eyes. He turned to his navigation officer. "Plot a course following that star pattern." As the ship changed course, Chen returned to her library. She had more work to do. Each story she collected was another thread in a vast tapestry of human experience. While alien civilizations relied on pure data, humans wove their knowledge into narratives that could survive any technological failure. She opened a fresh journal, her pen poised over blank paper. Today's events would become tomorrow's story, another piece of wisdom preserved not in cold data, but in the warm, living tradition of human storytelling. "Tell me," she said to the gathered refugees in her library that evening, "about the stars that guided your grandparents home." And as the stories flowed, Chen wrote them down, preserving not just routes and coordinates, but hope, determination, and the uniquely human ability to find meaning in the patterns of the universe. Because sometimes the best way to navigate the future was to remember how your ancestors found their way in the past. Dr. Aisha Rahman watched the quantum particles dance across her holographic display, their patterns shifting like ripples in a cosmic pond. While other scientists saw chaos and quantum uncertainty, she saw something different, something familiar. "Run the sequence again," she instructed her lab computer. The particle visualization repeated, showing the seemingly random quantum fluctuations that had frustrated scientists of every species for centuries. But Aisha wasn't looking at the data. She was looking at the spaces between the data, the subtle rhythms that reminded her of watching ocean waves as a child in Mumbai. There was a pattern there, not in the particles themselves, but in the way they moved together. "You're still pursuing this line of research?" Dr. Xin asked from the doorway of her lab aboard the research station, Horizon's Edge. The senior physicist's tone carried the same skepticism Aisha had faced for months. "The quantum field responds to observation," Aisha replied, her eyes never leaving the display. "Every species knows this, but we've all been trying to observe it the same way. Through machines, through pure mathematics." She gestured to the swirling pattern of particles. "Humans are different. We don't just observe, we intuit. We see patterns where machines see randomness because we're willing to trust our instincts." A hologram shifted, responding to her subtle adjustments. Where other scientists tried to force quantum particles into predictable behaviors, Aisha had spent months learning to work with their natural rhythms. "Look here," she said, highlighting a particular sequence. "When we stop trying to control the quantum field and instead try to understand its flow, patterns emerge. It's like learning to swim. You don't fight the ocean, you move with it." Dr. Xin stepped closer, his skepticism giving way to curiosity. The particle behavior she was demonstrating shouldn't have been possible according to standard quantum mechanics. "The breakthrough came when I stopped thinking like a physicist," Aisha explained, her hands dancing across the controls. "I started thinking like a musician, like a dancer. Quantum particles don't follow rules. They follow rhythms." She pulled up another display, showing the results of her latest experiment. Other species built quantum computers by forcing particles into fixed states. But what if we built one that works with their natural patterns instead? The implications were staggering. Every spacefaring race had tried to develop true quantum computing, but all had hit the same wall. Quantum uncertainty made the systems too unstable for practical use. Traditional quantum computers fail because they try to impose order on quantum chaos, Aisha continued. But humans, we thrive in chaos. We see patterns in randomness, find meaning in uncertainty. What if that's not a limitation, but an advantage? She initiated her test sequence. The quantum particles in her experimental processor didn't settle into rigid states like conventional quantum computers. Instead, they flowed in complex but harmonious patterns, like a microscopic dance choreographed by the laws of physics themselves. "The processor doesn't calculate," she explained as the results appeared. "It resonates. Each quantum state influences the others, creating a dynamic system that's stable precisely because it embraces instability." The test results were undeniable. Her prototype quantum processor was performing calculations that should have been impossible, solving problems that had stumped the finest computers in the galaxy. "This could revolutionize everything," Dr. Xin whispered. "Navigation, communication, defense systems." But Aisha was already looking beyond those applications. "It's not just about computing power," she said. "This proves something more fundamental, that the universe isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be understood. And sometimes understanding requires us to trust our human intuition over pure logic." She made a final adjustment to the quantum field, watching as the particles settled into a new configuration that seemed to pulse with its own inner life. Sometimes the greatest scientific breakthroughs came not from imposing our will on nature, but from learning to see the beauty in its inherent chaos. Michael Redwood stood in the Grand Assembly Chamber of Station Unity, watching representatives from 7 different species argue across the crystalline conference table. 3 weeks of traditional diplomatic negotiations had achieved nothing. Now it was time for a more human approach. "Distinguished delegates," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I suggest we take a break from formal discussions. Instead, I'd like to invite you all to dinner." The chamber fell silent. The Regelian ambassador's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "Dinner? We are discussing the fate of 3 star systems, and you propose a meal." Michael smiled, adjusting his worn leather jacket, a deliberate choice over the formal diplomatic attire others wore. "On Earth, we have a saying, The best deals are made over a shared meal. Each of you will bring a dish from your homeworld. I'll cook something from Earth. No translators, no protocols, just food and company. The Meridian representative's tendrils twisted in what Michael had learned was a gesture of skepticism. How can we share a meal when our biochemistries are incompatible? That's exactly the point, Michael replied. We'll each bring food we cannot share, but we'll share the experience of eating together. Sometimes understanding doesn't require perfect compatibility. To everyone's surprise, the Hive Mind Collective's ambassador spoke first. The concept has merit. Breaking bread together is a ritual the collective remembers from species we have incorporated. The dinner took place in the station's botanical garden, surrounded by plants from 100 worlds. Michael had prepared his grandmother's beef stew, while others brought everything from crystalline growth solutions to plasma-based nutrient fields. On Earth, Michael explained as he served his dish, we often cook the same recipes our ancestors did, even though we have more efficient nutrition options. It connects us to our history, our culture. The Meridian ambassador's tendrils waved in interest as she consumed her own shimmering nutrient spheres. We too maintained traditional feeding rituals, though we had not considered their cultural significance. As the evening progressed, Michael guided the conversation away from territory disputes and toward stories of home. The Regellian spoke of crystal gardens that sang in solar winds. The Hive Mind shared memories of world-spanning migration patterns. The Meridian described the beauty of binary star sunsets. Notice, Michael said softly, how we all develop different ways to appreciate beauty, different ways to find meaning. Yet we can understand each other's joy in these experiences. He pulled out a small wooden flute, another deliberate choice. On Earth, we use music to bridge gaps words cannot cross. Would you share your songs of home? What followed was unlike any diplomatic exchange in history. The Regellian resonated with crystal harmonies. The Meridian wove patterns of bioluminescence. The Hive Mind created complex rhythms through synchronized movement. We are all so different, Michael observed as the impromptu concert ended. Our bodies, our minds, our ways of living. But we all seek beauty. We all cherish our traditions. We all want to share our stories. He stood, looking at each delegate in turn. The territory dispute exists because we've been focusing on our differences, on the resources we can't share, the spaces we can't both occupy. But what if we focused instead on what we can share? Knowledge, art, stories. The Regellian's crystalline form pulsed thoughtfully. You suggest cultural exchange as a basis for territorial compromise. I suggest understanding each other as people before we try to solve problems as diplomats, Michael replied. Humans learned long ago that real peace isn't built on treaties. It's built on relationships. 3 days later, the Unity Accords were signed. The disputed territories became shared cultural preserves, where each species could maintain enclaves while participating in ongoing exchanges of art, music, and tradition. As Michael watched the delegates depart, he smiled. Sometimes the best way to build bridges between the stars was to remember what made people people, no matter what form they took. The central archives of the Galactic Council housed the greatest collection of knowledge in known space. Yet in a small, paper-filled room, 7 heroes of humanity gathered for the first time, brought together by a discovery that would reshape understanding of the war. Commander Sarah Chen spread her hand-drawn star charts across an old wooden table. Marcus Rodriguez tinkered with a mechanical timer he'd salvaged from the station. Dr. Maya Patil hummed softly, the crystalline walls resonating with her tune. Lieutenant James O'Connor leaned against the doorframe, deliberately off balance. Chen Wei arranged her journals in a circle. Dr. Aisha Rahman watched quantum patterns dance in her portable display. Michael Redwood set out cups of real Earth coffee. You've all seen the pattern, Sarah began, but none of us knew we were part of something larger, something uniquely human. Maya nodded, her fingers tapping a gentle rhythm. Each of us found a different way that human unpredictability gave us an advantage. But together, We're more than the sum of our parts, Marcus finished, his engineer's mind already seeing the connections. Aisha's quantum display pulsed in harmony with Maya's humming. Look at how our different approaches create a pattern. Sarah sees strategic flows. I see quantum rhythms. Maya hears cosmic songs. While I chart stars through stories, Chen added, opening one of her journals, and James turns space combat into dance. And I build bridges between worlds, Michael said, while Marcus reminds us that sometimes the simplest solution is the best. James straightened from his casual lean. The enemy thought they could predict us because they understood our technology, our capabilities, but they never understood our humanity, they said together. Sarah stood, excitement in her eyes. The quantum interference that's been disrupting communications, it's not random. It's a pattern we created together without realizing it. She pointed to her charts, where Marcus had overlaid his mechanical calculations. The pattern matched the resonance in Maya's translations, which echoed the quantum fluctuations Aisha had discovered. The same pattern appeared in James's flight paths, in Chen's collected stories, in the cultural exchanges Michael had facilitated. Every time we solved a problem in our uniquely human way, Aisha explained, we added to this pattern, not through technology or planning, but through our natural tendency to find unexpected solutions. The enemy's perfect logic couldn't account for it, Marcus added, because it emerged from chaos, from intuition, from the very unpredictability they dismissed as weakness. Chen opened her oldest journal. There's a story from Earth about a general who won a war by having his soldiers fight like farmers instead of soldiers. The enemy, expecting military tactics, couldn't adapt. We've done the same thing on a galactic scale, Maya said softly, not by being better warriors, but by being human, Michael finished. By solving problems in ways that only seem illogical if you don't understand what makes humanity special. Together, they crafted a message to the Galactic Council. Not a formal report or technical document, but a story. A story about how 7 humans, each working independently, had demonstrated that advancement wasn't just about technology or logic. It was about creativity, about finding patterns in chaos, about understanding that sometimes the best solution wasn't the most advanced one, about knowing when to trust intuition over calculation, about remembering old wisdom while seeking new knowledge, about building bridges instead of walls. As the Council received their message, a new understanding spread across the galaxy. The war ended not with a decisive battle or strategic victory, but with a revelation. True advancement came not from perfecting any one approach, but from embracing the beautiful unpredictability of existence. In the years that followed, their story became part of Chen's archives, told across 1,000 worlds, not as a tale of human superiority, but as a reminder that in a universe of infinite possibilities, sometimes the most powerful force was simply being yourself.